Hi, I'm Supervisor Don Knabe. I'm pleased to welcome you back to another episode of Dialed In. It's nearly November, and in the United States, that means it is election season. On November 4th, thousands of Los Angeles County residents will head to their local polling place and cast their vote in local, state, and national elections. Residents will also decide on a number of very important measures and propositions. Conducting elections for over 10 million residents in 88 cities and over 140 unincorporated communities is not an easy job. Though we are the most populous and diverse municipality in the country, Los Angeles County bears the distinction of having one of the lowest voter turnout rates. During the June primary, only 13.1% of nearly 4.8 million registered voters actually cast their ballot. As we approach the November general election, I'm pleased to welcome today Los Angeles County's Registrar Recorder and County Clerk, as well as the head of California Common Cause, to discuss voter trends and turnout here in California and Los Angeles County. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome back to Dialed In. My first guest today is Dean Logan, our Los Angeles County Registrar Recorder, County Clerk. Dean has been in this role since 2008. Dean and his team are responsible for conducting elections, providing death certificates, marriage certificates, birth certificates, and other many important legal documents. Welcome to the show, Dean.
Thank you.
Well, let's start. You know, everybody knows about elections and recordings and all those kinds of things. You have two main focuses. Why don't you tell the folks out there exactly what your department does?
Right. Well, we often joke that when they organized county government in LA County, they took everything that didn't fit in another department and they added a hyphen and a slash and called it the Registrar Recorder County Clerk. So as the Registrar of Voters, we oversee all elections and voter registration for the County of Los Angeles. As the Recorder of Deeds, all of the property transactions that take place, all of the records of property transfers, refinancing, all of those types of documents are recorded with our office and publicly available for people to do research on. We have vital records, birth, death, and marriage records. In addition to that, we issue marriage licenses and business licenses, and we conduct civil marriage ceremonies at all of our facilities.
Yeah, I mean, Valentine's Day and probably holidays, you're probably pretty busy
Huge,
out there.
yeah, very much.
They always show the lines in the news.
Yeah.
How many elections do you see a year?
That varies. We know that we have every year at least 3 elections. So in the even year, we have the June primary, the November general election, and then we have the retirement board election that we conduct routinely. In the odd year, we do a unified district election in November, which are our local and municipal elections for about 1/3 of the municipalities in LA County. Then on top of that, we have a series of vacancy elections that can be called at any given time by the governor. And that actually in the last few years has grown exponentially, so on average, we've been doing 6 to 9 elections. One year we were as high as 14 elections that we conducted in a single year.
There are not good reasons why that picks up, right? But it does happen, right?
It does, absolutely.
So when you oversee all these different kinds of elections here in the county, are you ever involved in any of the March elections for the cities, or just if they do the November?
No, we do some of the municipal elections in March if cities request us to do that. And then there are probably about 60 of the cities out of the 88 cities in the county that conduct their own elections.
Right.
Most of those in March, some of them, Long Beach and LA, as the large cities, have a slightly different cycle. But we do elections for a number of the cities, and even more recently, interestingly enough, with some of the concerns that have happened with some of the smaller municipalities in the counties, the cities are coming to us and asking us to conduct those elections. So, for instance, the city of Bell and the city of Cudahy will be conducting their elections this upcoming March.
So what does it cost to run an election? I mean, let's sort of look at the June primary and the general election. What are the costs involved there?
Right. Well, it's a huge undertaking, a lot of logistics involved in it. The most recent June election came in at about $38 million. So depending on the size and scope of the election, in a countywide election, it can be anywhere from $25 million to $40 million to conduct a full county election.
And then in the general election, why is it so complex?
Well, we're a complex jurisdiction. So, we have 4.8 million registered voters in LA County. That's more registered voters in our county than in 42 of the 50 states. So it's just a phenomenal jurisdiction. We also are the most diverse election jurisdiction in the country, as you well know, serving voters in multiple languages under the Federal Voting Rights Act. We provide all of our voting and election material in 9 different written languages, and add on top of that another 3 or 4 verbal languages where we provide bilingual assistance at the polling places. We're spread out over 4,083 square miles, so on an election day we actually have close to 5,000 individual polling places, and we rely on the work of 25 to 30,000 community poll workers to deliver that election process. So the logistics of getting all of those ballots back to our headquarters in Norwalk after the polls close at 8 o'clock, processing those and getting vote totals so people like you and the media know who won the election, it's quite an undertaking.
So just let's go back to the number of volunteers. You can give a little plug here. You really rely on volunteers for Election Day. Absolutely.
On Election Day, what I always say is we do a lot of work leading up to Election Day, but on Election Day, we really turn the election process over to the men and women who serve us at the polling places. They are the key to the success of an elections process, and we ask a lot of those people. So we recruit them, again, 25 to 30,000 people. It's a long day. They start out showing up at the polling place to set up at 6 o'clock. The polls close at 8. They still have another half hour to 45 minutes of wrap up and accountability that they need to do, but we couldn't do without them.
So someone out there is watching this and say, I want to help or I want to volunteer. Can they go online to?
Absolutely. If they go to our website, lavote.net, right at the top, they can click on poll worker information, and we're always looking for new poll workers. And there are particular areas in the county where it becomes really difficult, even as we lead up to the election, to get enough people. We need people who have bilingual skills and again, who have the ability, and really we're looking for people who have the drive to serve, who recognize that this is an important community activity, and they care about the elections process and want to be a part of it.
LA.net, lavote.net, right?
Right.
Important. So, all right, let's take us through from the time, people walk in, they go to their little area, they get their name crossed off, they cast their ballot, they drop it in the box, they get their little sticker, and they walk out and they go to their jobs, they go home, and maybe later that night they'll watch your returns. Sort of take us through from the time that vote is cast until the vote's counted at your operation. What happens during that day?
Right. Well, as you indicate, that's really, in many respects for us, that's just the beginning of the process. So those ballots in each of the polling places are secured in ballot boxes. When the polls close at 8 o'clock, those ballot boxes are opened. They physically count the number of ballots in the box, compare that to the number of people who signed the roster at the polling place. They secure those in a sealed box. Those then go from the 4,800 polling places to about 75 central locations around the county where they're checked in. The voting booths and all of that are returned back to us. We have a fleet of trucks out there. Then the ballots all come back to Norwalk, to our central location.
That's where you count them.
Right, and it's like a military operation on election night. So we actually, from those 74 locations, the ballots are transferred through sheriff's patrol cars, or in many cases through sheriff patrol helicopters.
Had the bomb sniffing dogs. I actually did the helicopter ride.
Right.
The Van Nuys. I almost got stuck out there in the fog, but it's a huge operation. I just thought maybe. Now you're working on a new system.
Right.
What's that going to be like?
Well, what we discovered or made the determination about 3 or 4 years ago is that, well, first of all, we're using a voting system in Los Angeles County that, by and large, is still the same infrastructure that was introduced in 1968 when we first went to punch card voting in LA County. Now, it's been modified over the years and improved, and it's a very reliable and durable system. But the reality is the software that it's based on and the equipment that we use it's at the end of its life cycle. And because of the size and complexity of our jurisdiction, there really has not been a commercial voting system that would meet our needs. So we set out on a journey to develop a new voting system, and we made a choice, the county made a choice at the beginning of that process to do that based on the voter experience. We wanted to figure out first, what would make a positive voting experience? What do people like about the way they vote? What do future voters think? So we talked to high school students and said, you're going to be 18. We're going to, in order for this process
focus
to work,
groups.
right? Exactly, focus groups, voter surveys, those types of things. So we're now in the process where we have a a design model, and we're looking at getting specifications written for that. So I think what you're going to see is a change, and it's going to be a gradual change in the voting process, where voters no longer will be limited to going to just one single polling place in their neighborhood. Right now, that's how the system works. In order to get the right ballot, you have to go to your single polling place in your neighborhood. We envision in the future vote centers located throughout the county where anybody in the county could access their correct ballot style. We also see them being open prior to Election Day, so it's not just going to be one day, one random Tuesday between.
You think
8
that'll
a.m.
help on voter turnout? I mean, 13.1% is absolutely embarrassing.
It is, and turnout is a tough question, and I think there are two sides of that. We obviously, as county government, have an obligation to be sure that we provide access and infrastructure that makes voting easy and convenient for voters when they choose to exercise that right. And of course, we want them to exercise that right because we see day after day what the power of the vote is. I think there's a bigger question out there that's harder to answer, and that is, why do we see this decrease in turnout? Is it the frequency of the elections? Do we have too many elections? Does it have to do with the timing of elections and what's listed on that ballot? It's hard to know, but I think we have to start asking those questions, and we have to determine what are the policy or political sides of that dialogue and what are the logistical and administrative sides, and we need to be sure that we're on top of the game on the administrative side.
It was nice of you not to mention it's the candidates. It's all machine. So what about the person that's in the military, overseas? How does that come into Election Day, say November 4th? When that's upcoming? So do they have to submit by a certain day, or can they, what if there gets, coming from overseas and Afghanistan and doesn't get there on November 6th? Do they get counted?
They do. We work very closely with the U.S. Department of Defense. We have an overseas and military voter program. Those are the first ballots that get mailed out. So sometimes when we're even still in litigation about ballot titles and that type of thing, we're still sending out mock ballots to those voters to make sure that they get them in time. In recent years, we've been able to actually send those out electronically so we can get them the blank ballot through an email or a PDF. The physical ballot still has to be back to us in order to be counted. California requires that physical.
By the election day?
By election day, but for military and overseas voters, if we get it back during the canvass period and it was postmarked or dated by election day, then it's still counted. So we have about 33,000 military and overseas voters.
And you oversee the largest voting system in America, is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Los Angeles County's Registrar, Recorder, County Clerk, big job. Most importantly, he and I both say, don't forget to vote this November.
When Connie Andrews got married, her maid of honor, Caitlin, made some unauthorized alterations to her dress. And Connie realized Caitlin was not her friend. When Connie got satellite, she joined the millions who don't get true on-demand. And she realized satellite was not her friend. Now Connie has Charter, with over 10,000 titles, many free. It's the on-demand she always wanted. Take it from Connie. Satellite is not your friend. Watch over 10,000 titles on demand with Charter.
Hi, welcome back to Dialed In. My next guest is a political mainstay here in Los Angeles County, Kathy Fung, who is the Executive Director of Common Cause. She's been an activist and civil rights attorney in California for over 15 years. Kathy, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Supervisor.
So, Executive Director of Common Cause, what is that? Explain to our viewers.
Well, it sounds fancier than it is, but Common Cause is an organization that's been around since 1970. We really took off around the Watergate scandals, unfortunately, because people really felt that our government needed a fresh injection of accountability, transparency, a reminder of ethics, and an opportunity for regular citizens to have a real say in the direction that our government was going.
Well, you've had a great background, I mean, as far as this point forward. So what effect do you think that the Common Cause has had on voters' rights and reforms here in the state of California?
Yeah. Well, so when I first came on, one of the issues that I'd been working on was redistricting, which, don't let your eyes glaze over. It is the thing that once every 10 years, because we take a census and we figure out where people have moved to and, been born or passed away, and then we try to draw those district lines so that each district has an equal number of seats. And I was a young attorney with the Asian Pacific American Legal Center at the time. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, we just have to get citizens together and talk about where their communities are. And then those lines will be drawn and they'll reflect kind of the direction that our county's going in, that our state is going in. And what I realized was that actually a lot of deal making happens behind closed doors. And those lines get drawn in ways where communities are very much pawns that are traded back and forth between different districts for political power. And it seemed to me that we really needed to change that. So one of the big things that we've helped to do is to really fundamentally change the way that redistricting happens at the state level. We now, because of a voter-passed initiative in 2008 and another one in 2010, we've created a Citizens Commission that takes input from real people around the state. And this year, or a couple years back, they took information from 20,000 people. It's kind of amazing on this kind of issue. And those lines are really drawn to reflect the direction that California is growing.
What impact do you think that that's had on the political landscape? I mean, from my perspective at least, I haven't seen much change. I mean, there's a lot of protection going on. I still think there's some issues there with fairness and competitive districts. What impact do you think it's had on the political landscape?
So some outside observers have taken a look at the districts that have been drawn, and one of the things that they can clearly see is that if you just look at those maps, rather than being these crazy shapes that reach out and don't seem to make a lot of sense, the commissioners really tried to follow city lines and to a large extent county lines when it made sense, right? And I think that that's significant because when people think about the geographies that they live in, they want those districts to kind of make sense because you want your representative to really understand, how groups of people that they're representing share values. I think the other piece that's really made a difference is that people have looked at the partisanship of those different districts, and at least at the state legislature, about a dozen or so are now districts that are toss-ups between Republicans and Democrats. And what that means is that those people who are elected from those districts form this healthy middle that every deliberative body needs in order to be able to find common ground when shaping policies. It's not that we shouldn't have left and right as well, but you need to have some people who are willing to kind of find that healthy middle that represents
solvers.
Yeah, problem solvers, pragmatists.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. And I would say that if you looked at the last 4 or 5 years, the big difference in our legislature, is, hey, we've got on-time budgets, we've got a number of bills that are being passed that are bipartisan, and we have a much more can-do attitude. And I think that's a healthy thing.
Oh, I absolutely do. Sort of an insider outsider, obviously in the political process, I represent over 2 million people.
You do.
But one of the things that I like about our districts is that we get to have total community of interest. We don't split cities between supervisors.
Yeah.
And I really think, like a city like Torrance or Long Beach, having 2 or 3 members of Congress makes it very difficult.
It's insane.
Very difficult for them to operate within that because they all have the same issues, but they could get caught up in a partisan piece.
That's right.
That could impact their lifeblood, their
right.
highways and their
That's right.
roads and
That's right.
all the infrastructure kinds of issues.
And the phrase that I use is that sometimes constituents will have a really important issue and they get ping-ponged between one district and another because somebody will say, well, I only have a little bit of your community, so go to the next representative. And particularly when communities have not great access to elected members, then that ping-ponging can have devastating effects on their economy, on their community.
Particularly in local governments, because we are in cities and counties where the rubber meets the road, school districts, whatever it may be, and so we don't get that 30,000-foot look at like Congress does, and they do all these esoteric kinds of things when really those decisions and that ping-ponging can really dramatically impact their city.
That's right.
What about term limits?
So term limits we worked with a coalition of organizations to look at that and sort of find the right balance. So we have term limits in California, and recently because of another initiative that we supported and that voters passed, we have extended the length of time that people can serve in both houses, but at the same time shortened the total amount of time, and to back up a little bit, what that means is what we had as a problem was 2 things. legislators would go into office and some people would seek leadership positions after only being there for 6 months. They'd barely figured out where the bathrooms were, and they were already trying to lead, the entire assembly or the time
Absolutely,
senate.
right.
And that's a scary thing, because what that means is that they tend to be very short-lived, but also short-term thinking, short planning, and the bills that get passed are short-term horizon. They're not thinking about what the long-term impacts will be.
I say that they wind up doing things that local government should be doing instead of looking at
That's
healthcare
right.
reform,
That's right.
education.
They take the easy stuff and they don't do the long-term things.
And the leadership, then they get in there within 6 months.
They're already out.
They're already out, and they're
Right.
getting their legs cut
Right.
out from underneath them
Right.
too.
And that also means that there tended to be more partisan bickering, because it takes time to get to know your colleagues, people who you might not always agree with ideologically, but who, frankly, there's always going to be something that you share in common.
Right, and the internal bickering as well with each party too.
That's right. And then the third thing was that because there were so many people who had such a short period of time in one house, they tend to become overly reliant on outside lobbyists. They don't have the policy chops. They haven't figured out every nuance of every policy. And so they were much more open to accepting bills that had been written by outside folks. I think with just a little bit of tweaking, now we have legislators who can make a choice. They can serve in a single house for up to 12 years. And what that means is that you have a little bit of a longer term horizon. You've got leaders who are much more willing to talk across different lines, whatever that is, and to build long-term solutions to big problems that we've got, whether it's the drought or transportation or healthcare.
Do you think Common Cause would ever get to the point to support no term limits? I mean, I know that's putting us sort of on the spot, but to me, there's a lot of sense of history and intelligence that you're losing, short term because of the actions of a few, and that's how term limits happen. You put term limits on the ballot, it passes.
Well, I will say this. I think that as a principled matter, Common Cause was never thrilled with the idea of term limits. But I also know that citizens love the idea of not having people have lifetime appointments to positions, because incumbency is such a strong factor, and it's very hard to kind of undo that. So I think having longer terms that people can serve and really kind of get the feel and flavor.
Institutional knowledge is so important.
Institutional knowledge is important. But at the same time, I think acknowledging that when people don't have confidence in their government, they like to have some check, and that check is term limits. It's real hard to argue against. As a policy matter, though, Common Cause does support loosening or even letting go of term limits.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other big thing here in California was Prop 14.
Yep.
How do you think, how is that in your eyes and that of Common Cause, Prop 14, as well as the campaign finance laws?
Right. So Prop 14 was the initiative that said, okay, whoever gets the most votes, the top 2 vote getters, move on to a general election. And in our state legislature, what that's meant is that in many cases, those districts will produce either 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans. Not every district. In many districts, you're going to have the traditional lineup. You might imagine that in some places like San Francisco, it might end up being Green Party versus Democrat, and some places in Orange County might be a Libertarian versus a Republican. And the idea was really to kind of allow for a broader range of voices to come in, but also, frankly, I just heard on the radio that about 1 in 4 Californians are now not registered with any party. And so this type of primary system would also allow people who are not registered with any major party to be able to cast a ballot for someone in the primaries. I think one of the healthy side effects has been that in the general election, you have people who are talking to the whole district, but you're also seeing that now in the primary election. They're talking to a much broader cross-section of the electorate.
They have to.
And that was the goal. The goal was not to always kind of run to each extreme, but to allow the process to really nurture candidates who were going to think about the broad cross-section of their electorate and not just their base.
And because it's interesting, because the parties continue to fight it, both Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah, it's hard.
What about campaign finance reform?
Yeah. So now you're talking real Common Cause stuff. One of the biggest concerns that we always have is that it takes money to run and be a viable candidate. And, a lot of media takes that as a shorthand. Who's raised the most money? That must be the most viable candidate. And if you haven't raised any money, then you're not a viable candidate. And so one of the things that we'd love to do, and we have already started doing some amazing things at the state level, is number one, increased disclosure, because I think a lot of voters, they get cues when they understand who's backing someone, right? They understand what that person is about and who they're responding to. But I think the other piece of it is we really have to give people the opportunity, if they want to put their name out there as a candidate, but maybe they're very active in their community, they're just not rich in and of themselves, that there should be a way for them to run by showing that they've got a lot of constituent support, maybe raising a lot of small dollar donations from people who live in the district, and then getting some type of matching fund or some incentive to continue being in the race. From our perspective, there are a number of really viable options. City of Los Angeles has a matching funds program, 6-to-1. If you raise enough small dollar donations, you show you're viable, you get a 6-to-1 match from city coffers. And what that does is, one of the things you might appreciate as a candidate is, it frees you up from having to spend a lot of time locked in a room with a list of donors, having to call for donations.
Worst part of running
come
for
in.
office.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people who think about running, they go into it for all the right reasons. They care about an issue. They get excited about some issue or project that they've been working on in their community, and then they run up against this big challenge, which is in order to get to the final line.
To get your message out, you have to spend money. I mean, it's all a dream if you want to be about. You can
Right.
walk precincts and city council races, school board races, but on a job like 2 million people, 26
Yeah.
cities, or a congressional
Right.
seat or a state senate seat, it's almost impossible.
So the question is there another way? Because ultimately we'd love for our electeds to be freed up to represent their constituents, raise money, but not raise money in a way where they feel that they now have to be beholden to those
Right,
donors.
or drive them to the point where the only candidates running are those that can self-finance.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the other one.
That's
So,
right.
look at one other quick question.
Yeah.
Time is running out. Supermajority, does that have an impact on the voter turnout?
I think that we have a lot of things that are depressing voter turnout. Some of them we're starting to tweak, right? By introducing things like redistricting reform, we're trying to make it so that you actually have a real choice when you get to the elections. You look at the Scottish elections, right? And
85%.
85%. When people are lining up to vote for something and you've got that kind of voter turnout, part of the reason was because the polling was showing it's 50-50 and it's pretty close, so every vote really, really matters. So the more that we can inject that type of sense of personal value, like my vote really, really, really counts, the more I think people will turn out. I think what percentage of voters are necessary to pass something, I personally think that our country was founded on simple majorities, and I think that when we set up a lot of supermajority votes, we're setting the hurdle pretty high, and that can have a depressing effect.
Kathy Fung, Executive Director, Common Cause, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
When Dennis Walker was in high school, his locker partner, Dave, stole his girlfriend. And Dennis realized Dave was not his friend. When Dennis got satellite, he also got an unreliable signal. And he realized satellite was not his friend. Now he has Charter and a reliable weatherproof signal, just like thousands of others who switch every month. Take it from Dennis. Satellite is not your friend. Get a reliable signal, rain or shine, with Charter.
Thank you again for tuning in to Dialed In. I want to thank my special guests, Dean Logan and Kathy Fung, for joining me today. Voting is the backbone of our democracy in our country. Unfortunately, we often take this right for granted. As the men and women of our armed forces continue to fight overseas, defending our rights and our freedoms, so few back home exercise their right to vote. A 13.1% voter turnout in a June primary is embarrassing, especially when 4 major county offices, including sheriff, needed to be decided. Whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Independent, Green, Purple, you have a voice. Register to vote by visiting lavote.net. Let your voice be heard and play a very important role in our democratic process. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Dialed In. I hope you'll join us next month for an all-new show.